Today, I'm chatting with Jim Salvucci about his incredible journey from academia to leadership coaching. Jim shares his experience going from a Boy Scout leader at the age of 18 to founding a School of Humanities at Stevenson University. He's going to dive into the importance of cultivating leadership, even from a young age. And we also talk about the difference between being a boss and being a really good leader, a true leader. Our conversation centered around the 4 C's of good leadership. We're going to talk about 2 in today's episode, the first 2, which are character and communication. We're going to explore things like the power of character in leadership, why communication is really critical, and how clarity in your communication, in the way you communicate, trumps everything. We also talked about learning from the negative paradigm. Jim's insights are really invaluable for anyone who's looking to grow as a leader and make a meaningful impact. I broke Jim's conversation with me into 2 parts. So you're going to get part 1 today with the first 2 C's, and then you're going to get part 2 on Monday with the next 2 C's. It was a great conversation, so let's get started. Hi, friend. Are you ready to move into a leadership position? Do you have interests and ambitions that you want to pursue, but feel like you don't know how to take that next step? Maybe you want to start your own coaching or consulting agency. I'm Mel, and I help educators define their career path through correct mindset, knowing your options, and getting prepared for your career transition. I will show you how to level up your leadership skills, share your expertise in a new way, create impact on a larger scale, and put your leadership in motion. As an educator for over 20 years, I started to feel underused and like I had more to give. I knew when the time had come for me to leave the classroom and affect change on a larger level. Now, I'm ready to help you determine where your talents and skills mesh with your passions and interests. Put your leadership in motion and move into that next phase of your educational career journey. Let me help you define your career path by having the right mindset, knowing your options, and getting prepared for that next leadership position. So power up and put your leadership in motion. Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Mel Vandevort. And today I have a guest all the way from New York, one of my favorite places, although he's not in New York City, and I'm not sure exactly how close he is, but I have visited New York and it is really fabulous, and I would love to go back there someday. But I have Jim Salvucci with us today, and he's going to be talking about the 4 C's of leadership. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thanks for having me, Mel.
You're welcome. So, Jim, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your journey through education, and then we're going to jump into the 4 C's of leadership.
Sure. So just to clarify where I'm at, I'm in Newburgh, New York, which is right on the Hudson River. In fact, if I look out my window, I can see the Hudson, but just about an hour north of New York City.
Okay, so not too far. Not too far.
Quick train ride down.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have been, or I was, an academic. I'm a recovering academic. I was in higher ed for 30 years, had a lot of different positions and whatnot. I was a professor, and then I moved on to administration. And basically how that went down was I was working at a school outside of Baltimore, small university called Stevenson University. I was an English professor, and I was a faculty leader. My whole life I've been a leader. I'd done leadership, and I was a Boy Scout leader long before I was supposed to be. I was too young and I didn't have the right rank, but they elevated me. I was a boss at age 18. So I was always thrust in these leadership positions, even when I didn't want them. And there I was a faculty leader, and I did a number of things at the institution, including running our faculty governance system a couple of times. And one day they came to me and said to me, well, we want you to be the dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. And I said, great, except there was no School of Humanities and Social Sciences. So I had to found the school. And what I did was I started putting together the pieces of the school. This goes with that. That was easy. It was actually easy. It's just nuts and bolts, management, no big deal. What was hard was getting it up and running and keeping it running. And that requires leadership. And like I said, I've been a leader my whole life, but I was a gut leader. I led with my gut. I used my instincts. I wasn't bad, but I never thought about it. I never thought about what is it to be a leader? What goes into it? And so, your normal thing is you look for models. You look for help. I had no training. So, I looked to my boss, who was the provost. He was very much a boss, not a leader. And I make a very strict distinction between the two. His boss, the president, was even worse. So there was no help there, no mentorship, no guidance, no models. I looked at my peers. They were kind of all over the place, imitated them for a while, didn't like how that was going, and decided I started to need to treat leadership as a discipline. It had to be something I studied. So English was my first discipline. I was an English professor. Leadership became my second discipline. So I started reading, going to trainings, meeting people, giving presentations, doing all these sorts of things, getting certificates in leadership. And I was also applying what I was learning as much as I could. Made a lot of mistakes, learned from my mistakes. I also discovered that you can, it's a good habit to learn from other people's mistakes. I call it learning from the negative paradigm. So I watched I watched people fail and try to figure out why did they fail and how did I want to do it differently.
Right. And we've all had a boss or a leader that wasn't a good leader. And you look at them and you're like, I know what not to do.
Yeah. But, a lot of people don't. Right? They look at that and they start imitating the boss. That's why there's so many bad bosses out there.
Oh, yeah.
They kind of knuckle under. Eventually, I left that school, became a vice president of a couple other institutions, small colleges, one in Iowa, one in Kentucky. And then I left higher ed altogether in 2020 and decided that I really, wanted to work on leadership. And my favorite thing as an administrator was helping young leaders become great leaders. So that's what I do now. I founded Guidance for Greatness. I coach young leaders. I speak. I'm working on a book. This is what I do.
Wonderful. And I was thinking back when you were talking about the Boy Scouts and stuff, and I was thinking, if you see a bossy little kid, that's the kid you really need to start cultivating leadership in because they've got the potential. It's just not harnessed in the right way necessarily. And you were talking about the bad bosses because they weren't cultivated in a way that shows good leadership later on in their life. So they didn't have someone to help them through that. So if you see a bossy little kid, then you might think, they got some leadership potential. We just need to cultivate that and harness it in a way that's for positive use instead of negative use, not necessarily negative, but you know what I mean? Yeah. And so I was just thinking there was kind of a connection there. It kind of made me think about that when you were talking about it.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I was a bossy little kid, but I was.
Right. Yeah,
but I'm a dependable kid. I was the kid you could always go to and I would get it done. That's why they always gave me those positions.
Right. But I was also thinking, I've been with little kids. I've taught everything from, preschool to high school.
Right.
And I've been a dean of instruction and a principal of an elementary. And there's some bossy little kids, but I think they've got leadership potential. We just need to cultivate that and teach them how to be really, truly good leaders as they grow up. I mean, there are natural leaders, definitely, but not everybody's just a natural leader. And you can learn to be a good leader. Yeah. And by noticing those around you, you can push people into leadership that really will be effective and make a good impact.
Yeah. And I would argue that those natural leaders, those gut leaders like I was, need to learn too. Right? There's much to learn. You can't do any great leadership by operating out of your gut. It just doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah. And I was the bossy little kid. So you may not have been, but I was the oldest of two and I bossed my brother around all the time. And I had to learn to cultivate that in a way that made me a better leader. But I had to recognize that in myself, that I wasn't necessarily a good leader. I was just bossy.
Right.
And so, definitely a little self-reflection there for sure.
That's funny.
So let's go ahead and step into the part where we talk about the 4 C's of leadership, because I know there's 4. And so we don't want to lose time here or run out of time for you to get them all in. So let's just dive right into that.
Yeah. So the 4 C's of leadership, let me just back up a little bit. So a lot of leadership advice tends to come in large chunks, right? Lists of things, 17 this, 21 that, 23 that.
Yes.
And we can't really comprehend that. the leadership advice is all sound. It's good. But what do you do with all those lessons and laws and rules and advice? One of the things that's true, according to researchers, is that we can really only handle on average about 4 things at a time, 4 concepts at a time. And it doesn't matter the interesting thing is, it doesn't matter how simple or complex they are. So you can handle 4 complex concepts just as easily as you can 4 simple simple concepts, which is very, very interesting to think about. So I reduced all those lessons into 4. And I realized there's just really 4 elements of leadership, and they happen to be in with the letter C. So how convenient.
Perfect.
And the first one is character, right? And that's who you are. It's your personality. It's your values, right? It's your belief systems. It's your experience. And this is really important. This is what gets left out all the time. It's your behavior, right?
Yes.
You can say, I want to be a brave person, but if you don't act like a brave person, you're not a brave person. So how you behave is critical to your character. So character is something people need to explore. Every single leader needs to explore themselves first. They need to know who they are before they can lead others effectively. They need to understand who they are, what their values are, where they're coming from, what they're doing, and they need to also control their behavior. We all have biases.
Exactly.
We all have negative thoughts. Every single person listening to this has negative thoughts they don't want others to know about. They have biases they don't want others to know about. That's normal. What's not right is when we act on those thoughts and those biases. We know they're wrong and we act on them. And so leaders have self-control. They behave in a proper way, even when their thoughts are going another direction.
Right.
So character is really key here. It's foundational to leadership. And then from character, we move into communication. And each of these builds to the next. So the second C is communication. And communication really consists of 3 elements, is the way I break it down. Aristotle talked about the logos to ethos, and the pathos in his rhetoric, which is kind of lost to us now. And so I came up with three different elements that speak to us a little bit more directly. The first is a message. You need to have a message. That's kind of obvious, right? You want to communicate, right? You need a message. Think of all the people, though, who lather on and don't really have anything to say.
Right.
Lots of people have messages, nothing to say. And that message has to be valuable. And that's where character comes in. The value of the message is driven by the values of the character. So if you're not a person of character, people aren't going to trust or like or listen to your message. And I always give the example of the boy who cried wolf, right? There's a little village. Up on the hill is a shepherd boy watching the sheep. He's bored one day. His sole role is just to yell wolf if a wolf shows up. He's bored one day, says, I'm going to have some excitement, yells wolf. Everyone comes running. They get up the top of the hill. He's laughing at them. This isn't good. Next day, same exact scenario. He yells wolf. They run up the hill. There's nothing there. Third day comes round. There's an actual wolf. He's finally got the excitement he's been craving. He screams wolf. And now they say, you know what? We don't trust you. You're not a person of character. You don't have good values. We don't trust your message. And the wolf comes in and devours everyone, including the shepherd boy. And that's what you get for not being a good person. But, that's a perfect example of a message that lacks value. So in communication, you need that message. The other thing you need is an audience. You need someone to receive that message, and you need to know who that audience is as best you can. And they have to be as receptive as possible. Now, you don't have a whole lot of control over that, but there are certain things you can do. For instance, I don't know exactly who's listening to this podcast, but I'm delivering a message. I hope it has value. I think it has value. There's an audience out there. I assume they're interested to some extent in education. Right there, maybe we can connect since I'm an educator.
Right.
So that tells me that they are going to be somewhat receptive to what I'm saying, right? They're going to be open to what I'm saying.
Yes.
But, another thing is you want to try to listen to people as much as possible. That's so key to communication, right? So while we're talking, we're on Zoom. I'm listening to you respond. I'm watching you respond. That's telling me something. That's a form of listening. Even if you're not saying anything, I'm responding to you. Those cues can come in a variety of ways. So knowing that audience and having that audience be receptive is key. And then the third element, absolutely critical, often overlooked, clarity. Clarity trumps everything. Clarity is in many ways the most important thing, because you can have a perfectly sound, wonderful message. You can have a perfectly receptive audience, but if you do not deliver that message clearly, guess what? No one knows what you're talking about. No one cares, and it's lost. I always use my poor wife as an example here. Years ago, we lived in Baltimore, and we were members of our neighborhood association, very active in the community. You know, she was a leader in the community, and she would send out text messages to a whole bunch of people, 15, 20 people. But she was also an attorney. And so she's a very busy person. She would type out these text messages, and I'd be like, I don't even know what this says. I honestly have no idea what you typed here, because you
right.
took the time. There's no clarity here. I'm sure you have an important message, but I don't know what it is, and no one else does. And so, you know, she had to slow down, take a couple seconds just to slow down, type it out clearly so people understood. You know, the other thing is, we often allow allow speed, our need for speed, to trump our clarity. And that's wrong, because when she did that, it became this, all these people were confused by her message. They're texting her saying, what does this mean? They're texting each other, wasting all this time. If she had taken 2 seconds, she could have typed out a clear message, and all that would have been avoided.
Yes.
So that's communication. The third C is,
I'm going to stop there for today. I want you to sit and ponder and think about what makes a good leader. And do you have those traits? The first 2 C's that we talked about, that Jim talked about, were character and communication. Good character is really foundational to good leadership. And communication is something that we can always work on. Join us right back here on Monday, where Jim shares the last 2 C's and what those look like in the context of good leadership. I will see you right back here on Monday. Have an amazing weekend. Bye-bye.